Hello, my name is Will Gosling and I'm the UK Human Capital Consulting Leader.
Hi everyone, Payal Vasudeva. I lead on future work in financial services.
So, Payal, welcome to our fireside chat, or more of our light bulb side chat. Delighted to be here. I think we're going to have a good conversation, I hope, around workplace, the future of workplace. That's the topic for today. And I suppose we should perhaps start by talking about what do we mean by workplace now? I mean, it's quite different for many of us. Over the last 7 months, and I suspect many people watching today, we've all been working from home or living at work, as one of my colleagues calls it. And that's been a mass shift and a very big change for everybody in terms of or most people anyway, in terms of their workplace. But I suppose this, we've done lots of research and talking about the future of work in the past, and this shift was something we were already beginning to see, much more flexibility both in jobs and more technology allowing work to be done much more remotely and flexibly. So we were starting to see, I suppose, the term workplace take on new meaning anyway. But what do you think the workplace means in this new normal?
I think it's what you just said earlier, Will. I think times I felt like I'm like living at work, right? And as somebody who talks about future of work in the market, I keep thinking this can't be the future of work where we've just replicated the office at home, right? And we're all doing this. We've got some form of email, chat, some collaboration tool, and invariably it's felt like sort of back-to-back Zoom marathons, right? And I'd like to believe that we are starting to now fundamentally think about our ways of working and how we need to sort of redefine that. And I think the longer we continue in this pattern of working, it is going to call for a reimagination of the workplace. And when I say workplace, for me that means both physical and virtual. And how do you start ensuring that there is more of a seamless experience between the two? And as you say, the new normal is likely to be where one uses the workplace slightly differently. So it's kind of, what's the purpose of the workplace going forward? And I think it's one where you start fostering that sense of community and culture and collaboration. It's spaces for innovation where you interact with your customers and your clients and your employees. And that's the kind of sort of workplace that we're envisioning going forward. But as I say all those things, I'm also conscious that those are the very things we're not able to do today in the here and now. So what I'm not seeing is this sort of rush by organizations to start investing in workplace redesign and reconfiguration, but definitely a more deliberate focus now around what are some of the enabling foundations. So what's the tools and technology that they need to have in place? What are the talent practices that are going to enable more flexible working? And I think from that, we will now then see more of that kind of rethink around what that workplace configuration needs to look like.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. That blend between the virtual and the physical, getting that right and getting the human experience through that is going to be absolutely key. I mean, I think we were all really good at understanding how to work in the old world, or I say old world, 7 months ago, when we were all in the office, we all kind of knew how to do that with a little bit of remote working involved. And we've all kind of worked out, I think, pretty much tiring as it is, and some issues, of course, associated with the virtual world. When we get back to that blended world, or whatever the new work patterns look like, and we'll come on to talk about that, I do worry about whether we're going to really be able to, how that's going to happen. I think there's a risk it gets left to chance. And I was talking to a client just yesterday who, in return to work, or starting to do a bit of return to work, had a 50% physical meeting and a 50% remote meeting. So the ones people in the office around a board table, and everyone else dialing in, and it was a real disaster. He said. I mean, it was really a real struggle because people got used to working in different ways. People on the Zoom call couldn't break into what the conversation that was going on in the room. So I think for me, we can't leave this stuff to chance, and we're going to have to really think about not only behaviours and rules and protocols, etc., but also, as you say, the technology. I think we're only in the foothills of the technology that's really going to enable this new world of working.
And as you've just said, right, also ensuring that we don't inadvertently start creating this sort of two-tier workforce, right? Whereas the ones in the office and the ones working remotely. And whatever tools and technology we're using needs to actually be inclusive for all.
Yeah.
And again, similarly, I've been speaking to a few clients who've been now sort of thinking about one of the core design principles being that actually maybe for meetings going forward, actually it's virtual for all, irrespective whether you're sitting in the office or you're sitting remotely.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, we are just going to have to get more deliberate about how we establish some of these team norms and ways of working.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I know you've been doing some interesting research, specifically in the City of London. I think it's called Future City Survey you've done. So maybe give us some headlines from that.
Sure. So this survey was London-centric. It was done in sort of that May timeframe, and subsequently there have been a number of other surveys in the market and also surveys that organisations have done internally to try and capture a bit of employee sentiment, and very sort of similar themes coming through. So let me just talk you through some headlines. First and foremost, what came through quite strongly was an overall sort of positive sentiment around remote working, and that was in majority. With the positivity, the next question then is about productivity. To say, okay, so people, are saying on balance that they've liked sort of working remotely and virtually, but actually what's happened to productivity? And interestingly, productivity hasn't fallen off a cliff. In fact, again, it's been same or improved in the survey results. And I think while, yes, it's self-reported productivity, there have been other surveys that have talked about, how productive do you think your colleague has been? And it's been, again, very similar, same or improved in terms of productivity. Anecdotally, speaking to some organizations where they are able to measure output quite clearly, so whether that's call centers, KYC checks, M&A, deal flow through, we have seen sort of single-digit upticks in productivity measurement. So it's kind of telling us, well, productivity has sort of been okay through this period. So that's good, it's positive and you can be productive. Then if you look at well-being, again, in majority people reporting that this hasn't been detrimental to their well-being. But I take that one with a little bit of caution, because I don't think you could say, well, in majority people it's been fine for people's well-being, because if 70% say it's been fine and 30% say that they're struggling in some shape or form, you can't afford to have 30% of your workforce struggling with well-being, right? So you do have to look at that as a more holistically rather than a kind of majority-minority. And then I would say, really, when it comes down to the heart of it, the key sort of theme that has emerged for me has been around the greater desire for more choice and flexibility. And I think that speaks to the heart of the changed ways of working that we're talking about. And again, in majority, people saying, well, we'd like to work from home 2 to 3+ days a week. And the number of individuals now saying that they want to work in the office the full 5 days, pretty much nearly down to 0, right? So that's quite a significant shift in what has been a fairly short period of time. And again, I appreciate, I think some of you also participated in the poll that was run at the conference over the last couple of days. And again, very similar results and themes coming through in terms of kind of headline sentiment.
Yeah, fascinating insights there. And I think that links, you said that was focused on the city, but I think that links more broadly to what we're seeing across certainly the UK. In some other surveys, I saw the ONS, Office for National Statistics survey, come out last week, and we talk about the acceleration to the future of work. I thought this was a really interesting example of it, in that 30% of workers surveyed said they intend to formally, instill some form of permanent working from home in their model, if you like, in their day-to-day working week, going forward. That's up from 5% in mid-April. I mean, and given that home working, if any way, shape or form, has been growing at about 0.2% a year, I mean, that's decades of growth just we've achieved in almost overnight. So so I think that to me is really interesting.
But as we say all those things, well, we can't help but think that something's shifting here, right? Yeah. Employees' expectations are changing, and actually quite rapidly as well, in terms of how they even expect their organizations and employers to show up, right? And over this period, actually it's been quite heartening to see. I think leaders and organizations have shown their more human side, and well-being has clearly been front and center in terms of kind of what organizations are focusing on. And it's really had kind of that spotlight moment. And with that, also this notion of how do we hone into the right skills and capabilities that our people will need as we start navigating this new world of work. So it's feeling like to me that work patterns are shifting. And with that, the implication on the workplace is also going to come about, right? Because there's going to be that ripple effect.
Yeah.
What are you seeing emerging in terms of some of those new patterns?
Well, just before I go there, you mentioned something about well-being there, and it just reminded me of a conversation I was having recently about well-being and the importance of well-being going forward for organisations, in that it becoming actually well-being being a strategic advantage, actually investing in the well-being and resilience of your workforce. Actually, you know, we're going to be in this pandemic for some time, but there could be future ones as well. And having a healthy workforce, I think, is a really important strategic play. But equally, I think employees are going to be looking for employers that are really investing in this space. And that will have a knock-on effect in terms of what the workplace design looks like as well, because, you know, well-being at work, you know, there's, whether that's, you know, gyms, well, whatever places to help people, doctors and all sorts of things on site, when they come in, they feel safe and they have some of that support, I think is going to be really important. But if I look at what we're going to see, I think in terms of workplace design, well, I think we're going to hyper jump, not yet, as you said, but I think we're going to hyper jump to workplaces being designed much more deliberately for different type of work, right? So collaborative work together, work that you can only really do together. So much more flexible spaces, kind of greenhouse spaces, those types of things. But also workspace designed for learning, workspace designed for community building, workspace designed for celebration. That's in a very deliberate way. We were seeing some of this, again, thinking about the future of work. We were seeing many buildings, many office spaces, and non-office spaces, that's just broader workplaces, start to embrace some of these things and make them feeling a little bit different to the traditional place of work. So I think the other thing to think about, though, also, of course, is it's not one size fits all. Every organisation has got wildly different types, or many different types, typically, of work going on. Our own business, Deloitte, we have, you know, the consulting business where you and I work, tends to be quite a lot of collaborative teamwork going on when we're in the office, but most of the time we're out at clients, you know. So we're kind of doing that side of things. Whereas perhaps our colleagues in tax or corporate finance and other areas are spending more time. They're at clients, of course, also, but spending more time in the office and more, you know, individual work. So it's not one size fits all, and the organisation has to kind of address that, and the workplace needs to address that. But I think what's also important here, and I think I'm starting to see a little bit of a theme emerging, is that organisations are starting with the workplace. It's quite seductive to say, right, okay, we're going to have more home working in our work life, then we're going to need less office space, or we're going to need to redesign that office space. And I think, you know, that probably is right to some degree, but how much and how far and what does that look like? I think you need to start at the other end. We talk about work, workforce and workplace when we talk about the future of work. And I think you've got to start with work. You've got to really take a step back, use this opportunity to unpick what work really is. What work do you need to do? What work do people need to do individually? What work can machines help with more? What work can you do remotely? I mean, I don't just mean remotely as in at home, but I mean different locations, you know, the death of distance. And kind of look at all that, and then build work back up into what a workforce looks like. Compose your workforce, know what your workforce is and where you want it to be located. Then you can get into the implications for workplace. So I think it's just, for me, it's just coming at it the other way. I think there's a great opportunity to do that.
And I think very much sort of, you know, as we talk about future of work and kind of our Deloitte sort of way of navigating that space is looking at it through three very integrated dimensions of work, workforce and workplace. And actually it's remembering that actually the one informs the other, as you said, right? And organizations that I've been liaising with are starting to now think about the fundamental nature of work. So what is it that they do, the nature of the task itself, and then start thinking about what does that mean in the context of the workforce segments that they have. And segments here not being where you sit in a hierarchy and what your reporting lines are, but actually by the type of work that you do, right? Is your role predominantly customer facing? Is it actually in a support function? And thinking about the nature of work itself, and then saying, what does that then mean in terms of the workforce capabilities that we need? And to your point, where does that need to then be delivered from? And even are those capabilities things we want to nurture within the organization, Or is this something that we tap the broader ecosystem for and actually start looking at talent pools that might be more diverse? And it's those elements that are starting to come together. And then there's the enabling elements, right? The workplace configuration that you want to have, the tools and technology that are going to enable this hybrid workforce of the future. And what's been interesting to see is organizations are starting to sort of frame some North Star ambitions in terms of what this new normal means for them, both from a context of experience, so how are they going to interact with their customers? What does this mean around employee experience? What does it mean around operating models? How do we ensure that we are the most efficient and effective that we can be? And I think there's this real recognition that there's some learnings from everything that we have gone through in this period, and how do we actually capture some of that and use it to inform what we do going forward? And then also looking at kind of what that real estate footprint needs to be and how it's going to sort of support this ambition. And I don't hear anyone talking about the demise of the workplace, as you've said. It's more around what is the purpose of the workplace going forward. And it's the things you just mentioned around the collaboration, the innovation, the customer and the employee interaction elements. And again, those might not be the things we can do today in the office, but that's actually where the thinking is headed. And I think that that's quite positive in allowing us to start reimagining what the workplace of the future can be all about. The other thing that's coming up quite often in conversations is this notion of productivity, right? And ensuring that actually we continue to be productive in whatever format that we're working in. And again, here looking at it from that lens of efficiency, effectiveness, and empowerment. So, and what I mean by that is if you're looking at efficiency, it's ensuring that you don't have productivity leakage, right? That your tools and processes are enabling people to do work efficiently. And then the effectiveness element actually for me is more about the outcome focus, right? And we're seeing a lot of focus now on KPIs being more outcome driven and saying that actually, do we have the established team norms and is there clarity in terms of how we get to outcome? And then empowerment, and that brings us back to where we started with well-being. Yeah. So how do you connect that then to a sense of purpose and actually put well-being at the heart of work design? And I'm aware that some boards are already thinking about talent metrics, not just in the context of retention and attrition, but actually well-being as that being an indicator of talent strength. So those are some emerging sort of themes, if you will, around this, but absolutely needs to kind of sit closely coupled as workplace, and workforce. So we continue to appreciate the dynamic across those dimensions.
Yeah, that focus on outcomes, which I'm a big believer in, I think that's a big shift, isn't it? It's for a lot of managers and leaders, and I'm actually hearing some organisations going in the opposite direction actually, and putting activity tracking, software, and also just getting leaders and managers to do much more activity checking, which I worry is the opposite of what we need here, and we need probably more trust and, as you say, more clarity and focus on outcomes, and everyone understanding that.
So like check in, but don't check up.
Exactly, yeah, exactly right. Just a few examples I'm seeing in terms of new patterns of work. These are all publicly available. I saw last week that Microsoft have announced that employees will be able to work from home up to less than 50% of their contracted hours. And also be open to or be able to relocate and potentially even internationally, which I thought was quite interesting. We've talked about businesses looking at reducing real estate footprints because they feel that having people in there less often, and perhaps even fewer all the time. We're actually an organisation called Blurred, a creative agency. They're actually going the opposite way, and they've expanded their space because they want much more collaborative working space. But also, back to the well-being point, created sleep pods to help people deal with the kind of accommodation issues that they might have if they're only coming in. They've moved out and they're only coming in 1 or 2 days, 2 days a week. And then a business called recruitment business called Indeed. They have come up with a view that a policy, I think that everyone in the organisation will sort of tag themselves or be tagged as either 100% remote, 100% in the office, or some blend in between. And they're giving everybody $1,000 to set up a home office remote section as well. So I think that's just a few interesting examples.
I mean, for me, in all of those scenarios, right, wherever you land on the spectrum of remote working, I think it's quite important to actually focus on kind of line manager and team lead capability, right? Because we've all worked predominantly working in the office, and now we're all predominantly working from home. Everything's pointing to the answer being somewhere in the middle, right? And actually, we haven't grown up in our own leadership abilities, actually managing hybrid workforces in the everyday in that manner. And I think that does take some deliberate focus and effort to say, how do we enable and equip our team leads, our line management to actually establish those effective ways of working and the team norms, so that you do have an engaged, well and productive workforce, right? And I think that is also going to take some more deliberate thought in terms of what are the enablers that are going to uplift capability for the team leads.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's something, think about the future of work and what we've been talking about for some time, the whole evolution of performance management is something we've talked about a lot, and there's been quite a lot of big experiments, people moving away from forced ratings and different styles and much more agile check-ins and all that kind of thing. And I think lots of that should still remain, but it's not as simple as just saying, right, that's what we're going to do, and just and implementing it without, as you say, investing in the capability and the change management associated with this. It's quite a big deal.
And I just want to sort of use this as an opportunity to kind of step back a little bit as well, because we've talked about organizations and we've talked about workplaces, but one can't help but think about what does this mean in the context of cities and talent more holistically, right? If you think about it, we've gone through now an extended period of not having the city as our primary hub of work activity. And in fact, what I've seen is almost a bit of a rejuvenation of our local high streets, right? Just because that's where people are working, closer to home, etc. And clearly, and I can speak for myself as well, one has not missed the commute into the office, right? And I think that's changing the balance and the dynamic in cities as well. And if I think of that from a context of talent, there's been a lot of discussion around access to talent now, that if we're not bound by a radius around a central city office, then actually our access to talent becomes far more widespread and perhaps more inclusive as well, because we can now tap into talent in different parts of the country, of the world. And great perhaps point. That also then is more inclusive from a standpoint of giving people more access to opportunity. And while that's one facet of it, you're also starting to see some conversations bubbling up around location-based pay, which again, I don't think may be viable across all roles, but the fact that these kind of conversations and debate points are coming up, it just makes me think that this is only the beginning, right? There are going to be a whole host of sort of implications and repercussions of our changed ways of working, and we're only at the start of this journey in some ways, right? Yeah. I'd love to get your thoughts on what do you think from kind of a future of cities standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do that. I think just your point on commuting, I read a statistic last week that American workers have saved 9 billion hours on commute since the middle of April, which is an enormous amount of time. But a third of that has gone into longer working hours. Takes us right back to some of the issues we talked about. So, but look, to answer your question on cities, look, I'm glass half full on the future of the city. I think cities, of course, we're going to experience a change, as we've discussed. We're going to see a little bit of some reverse migration, and look at the house prices just in the UK, and the regions have gone dramatically up at the moment. So I think we're definitely going to see a little bit of that, and of course, commute patterns are going to change. So it's going to be more distributed across a day or across the week, and that I think is probably is going to be a good thing, right, for congestion and quality of life in a city. I actually though think, again, something we were on it already moving towards, but the advent of smart cities, where technology, authorities and citizens interact in a way that they can self-heal the city, for example, in a way that's much more positive about about what it's like to live in a city. So the city, I think, can take on. It might lose some work, but I think it's going to gain some life. And I think that's very positive. And where real estate property does reduce from an office use, I think it'll get repurposed. I think we'll see some really innovative, creative uses of property that again will enhance life in the city. And finally, as obviously a climate impact to much of what I've said, but again, this sort of smart city concept, we're seeing things like technology help reroute refuse trucks to take the right route around the city, tearing up the rules of what used to do, and saving dramatic amounts of time and fuel. You just have to Google Cascais smart city, which is a city in Portugal, where they're already trialling some of this stuff already to great effect. And the city, I think, has got a bright future.
That actually sounds quite exciting, right? Because it feels like there's this collaboration strategy between human and technology, right? One augmenting the other.
Yeah.
And actually, this is as much about the public sector, the private sector, education, organizations, all working together in terms of kind of reimagining what this new normal needs to be about, and one that actually benefits all.
Yeah. I really hope that partnership, public sector, private sector, I hope that's going to be something good, some goodness that really comes out of all of this, and some brilliance we can bottle as well as we look to the future. So we've covered quite a lot of ground there, Payal. We've talked a lot about the workplace and how the concept of the workplace is evolving, physical, virtual, and the interplay between the two. We've talked about patterns of work, new patterns of work, and we've talked about the future of cities as well, just there at the end. Okay, well, I think we're about there. That's it from us. Thank you very much for joining us today and for listening in.
Thank you very much.